Hey everyone, and welcome. Have you ever looked at currency exchange rates and just thought, what is going on here? Why does your dollar sometimes feel like a king's ransom, and other times it feels like pocket change? It's a huge, fascinating puzzle, and today we are going to put all the pieces together.
Okay, let's imagine this guy, we'll call him Bob. He's from the US and he's about to travel. He goes to swap his money for a trip to Germany and finds out that $1 gets him about 90 euro cents. Okay, a little less, but it makes sense. But then, for his trip to Vietnam, that exact same dollar bill gets him 25,000 Vietnamese dong. How is that possible? Why isn't $1 just €1 or 1 dong? That is the big mystery we're diving into today.
All right, to get why money works the way it does today, we've got to rewind the clock a little bit. You see, there was this massive, game-changing shift in how the entire world thought about money. And it all started by moving away from something you could actually hold in your hand. So, for a long time, we had what was called the gold standard. It was pretty simple, really. A country's money was directly backed by a specific amount of actual gold. A dollar bill was basically an IOU for a tiny chunk of gold sitting in a vault somewhere. This kept things pretty stable. A government couldn't just fire up the printing presses unless it got more gold. But, economies grew, and this system became kind of restrictive. So, by the 1970s, most of the world had switched over to what we now call fiat money.
So what in the world is fiat money? Well, this is where it gets kind of wild. It's money that has value simply because the government says it does. And, just as importantly, because all of us agree to believe it has value. It's not backed by gold or silver or anything physical. It's backed by one thing: trust. Trust in the government that issues it.
And here is the single most important thing to understand. Without a physical anchor like gold, the value of our modern money comes down to one of the oldest rules in the book, supply and demand. It's really that straightforward. If a lot of people want a certain currency, its value goes up. If nobody wants it, or if there's way too much of it floating around, its value plummets. It's that simple and, well, that complicated.
So, what is it that actually pushes this supply and demand around? Well, we can break it down into 4 key drivers that basically decide how strong a currency is. Let's dig into the first one.
Okay, driver number 1, inflation. You've definitely heard this word. Put simply, inflation just means your money buys you less today than it did yesterday. If a country has really high inflation, it's a sign that the government might be printing way too much money. And when that happens, who wants to hold on to a currency that's basically melting in your pocket? Nobody. So demand for it just tanks. If you want a really dramatic, almost unbelievable example of this, just look at Zimbabwe. Back in 1980, the Zimbabwean dollar was actually worth more than the US dollar. It's true. But after years of economic chaos and just printing money like there was no tomorrow, hyperinflation took over. By 2008, the currency had totally collapsed. It took about 600,000 Zimbabwean dollars just to equal a single US dollar. It's a scary lesson in how fast value can just vanish. Our second driver, interest rates. They act like a giant magnet for money. Here's how it works. A country's central bank sets interest rates. When those rates are high, it means you can get a better return on your investments there. Well, that looks really tempting to foreign investors looking to make a profit. But to make those investments, they first have to buy that country's currency. All that buying creates a ton of demand, which, you guessed it, makes the currency stronger. But, and this is a big but, there's a catch. A country can't just crank up its interest rates to the moon. Why not? Because while it's great for attracting foreign cash, it also makes it super expensive for its own people and businesses to borrow money. If nobody can afford a loan for a house or to start a new company, the whole economy can grind to a halt. It's a really tricky balancing act.
All right, our third driver is all about confidence. Think about it. Investors aren't just going to throw their money anywhere. They want to put it somewhere safe. So a country that's politically stable, where the rules aren't going to change overnight, is really attractive. Same goes for economic stability, low debt, low inflation. All of this makes investors feel like their money is secure, which attracts more investment and keeps the currency strong.
And finally, our fourth driver, the balance of trade. This is basically about what a country buys from the rest of the world versus what it sells to the rest of the world. Take a country like Japan, which exports a ton of cars. Well, anyone in another country who wants to buy a Toyota has to first buy Japanese yen to pay for it. All of those transactions create a constant, steady demand for yen, which helps make it more valuable.
Now, the ultimate power move for this is something called the petrodollar.
See, after the US made a deal that oil would be priced and traded only in US dollars, it meant that every single country that needed to buy oil, which is pretty much every country, first had to buy US currency. This created this massive, non-stop global demand for the dollar, and it's a huge reason why it became the world's main reserve currency.
So with all these complicated factors flying around, what if a country just wants a stable currency without all the drama? Well, some of them take a pretty clever shortcut. They just peg, or tie, their currency's value directly to a stronger one. Here are a couple of perfect examples. The Brunei dollar is pegged 1-to-1 with the Singapore dollar. That means they always have the exact same value. Easy. And in Belize, their dollar is pegged to the US dollar at a fixed rate of 2-to-1. It makes everything really simple and predictable.
But this shortcut comes with a massive trade-off. When you peg your currency, you get stability, sure, but you also give up control over your own economy. You can't really set your own interest rates anymore. It's like tying your small boat to a giant cruise ship. Your boat is stable, but you're going wherever that big ship goes. If the US dollar suddenly falls, the Belize dollar gets dragged right down with it.
You know, all of this naturally leads to some pretty big questions. If managing all these different currencies is so messy, why not just simplify the whole thing? Let's talk about that.
I mean, on the surface, it sounds like a brilliant idea, right? One single global currency would just get rid of exchange rates entirely. Travel and trade would be a breeze. But we actually have a real-world experiment that shows us just how tricky that can be, the Eurozone.
Here's the problem. When you have one currency, every country has to give up its economic independence. So when Greece had that massive financial crisis back in 2009, it couldn't use the normal tools a country would use, like devaluing its currency to make its exports cheaper. And because its problems were tied to the euro, one country's crisis suddenly threatened to bring down the whole system across the entire continent.
And this brings us to a final, really important myth to bust. The idea that the goal is always to have the strongest currency possible. That's not always true. A strong currency is awesome for your citizens when they're buying stuff from other countries because it makes imports cheap. But a weaker currency can be a huge advantage for countries that sell a lot of stuff because it makes their products cheaper and more competitive for the rest of the world to buy.
So we end up right back where we started, with a puzzle. A single world currency sounds incredibly convenient, but it also carries the massive risk of a single point of failure for the entire global economy. This system we have now is messy and confusing for sure, but it gives each country the freedom to steer its own ship. So what do you think? Which trade-off is better? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for watching.